It's Sunday, which means it's time for Krystal and I to answer your burning questions in another round of Rising Qs. Let's get to it, Krystal. What do we got?
All right, so our first question comes from Brian June on Twitter. He asks, what percentage of Bernie supporters do you think would eventually vote for Warren if she were to become the nominee? I think it would be very, very, very high. I mean, you're always going to have, look, no matter who supporting them or who the nominee is, there's always going to be some break off, but I think it's a fairly small percentage.
I would say like 95%. Right? I think that's probably fair.
Yeah, I think that's right.
95%.
Yeah.
That's usually how it works. I mean, most Bernie supporters supported Hillary ultimately whenever it came down to Hillary versus Trump. Same thing on Republicans with Trump versus Hillary. There is a certain level of zero-sum game whenever it comes down to it. So I wouldn't expect that much break off.
Yeah, but I will
even though there can be hard disagreements.
And look, I will say, and I made this point this week, that like if they don't vote for Warren or whoever the eventual nominee is, like that's their prerogative. I mean, because it annoys me when people are like, you're stupid or you're not a patriot or you threw your vote away if you vote for a third party. You have to make the case to them that you're worthy of their vote. No, everybody has to earn it. You shouldn't have this arrogance of like, oh, I'm just entitled to your vote.
And the real question too is actually what percentage of Bernie supporters may not vote at all if Elizabeth Warren becomes the nominee. That I don't actually know, right? Which is what percentage of you would stay home if Elizabeth Warren were to become the nominee. That's a much more different question.
Yeah, although I do think, what they say about Donald Trump is a great unifier on the left is true.
Yeah, I do think so.
People are fairly united in wanting to see something else. What else we got?
Second question from Sophia Chang. She says, do American voters care enough about candidates' foreign policy, and which candidate, quote, knows their way around or would be the most effective in implementing policies in Washington?
They just want to see us fight, Saagar. Okay, so there's two questions here. First of all, no, I don't think that I don't want to say they don't care enough about foreign policy. I would say more the media doesn't care about foreign policy. And so it's not presented, it's not put in context of why this should matter to people, but it should be a very important part of the race. And in fact, to that point about what the voters care about, I mean, look how many elections now have turned on the Iraq War and people's position there and how they reacted, whether they voted. But like that's been an incredibly important factor for people. Important factor for Trump voters was him being the first Republican to really come out and say like this was not what we should have done. So I do actually think it is a much more important issue than the media treats it as. And as we've discussed here before, the commander-in-chief powers, like that's the one area where you really do have a lot of bandwidth, a lot of power. You get to chart your own course. So it should be more of a focus.
On foreign policy, I think what voters care about is that you be against war. That's what it is.
It's the biggest thing.
Yeah, the one thing they need to hear from you is, I will take us out of Afghanistan and Iraq. Now, at this point, I'm not sure anybody really believes it because we've voted, 3 times now for withdrawal from these 3 places, and all 3 times none of it has happened, still there. I will say the second question is a lot more interesting. Who knows their way around Washington? I actually think, so it's funny because Joe Biden knows his way around Washington and would also be one of the least effective in implementing policies in Washington.
So true.
And it's fascinating. And whereas Elizabeth Warren, if I were to slip it, she does not know her way around Washington as much, and I think would be the most effective in implementing her policies in Washington. I am basing all of this based around, I don't believe anything will happen in the Senate. I think you could be the most talented politician of the age, and until the economy or like a war happens, like a true Great Depression, New Deal style event, nothing's ever going to get done. But I'm a cynic.
You look at Obama.
Yeah.
I mean, he and his people certainly knew their way around Washington, right?
Yeah.
That wasn't the problem.
That doesn't mean you can actually get anything done.
And yet they were very ineffective ultimately. I mean, it was a very sort of impotent administration constantly throwing their hands up saying, well, we're doing the best that we can. Sorry, we can't have nice things because of these people over here. I really think, and this gets to a debate we have all the time on the show, I really think you have to come at it from a fundamentally different approach. You both have to know how to work in Washington, have a team around you that actually supports what you want to do and isn't trying to undermine you or talk you out of it, right? You can't be constantly justifying the mission statement every day when you're in the Oval. Everybody has to be rowing in the same direction. So that's number one, but also you have to combine that organizer-in-chief, that outside pressure role, or else I just don't see how you get anything done more than executive action, which, okay, fine.
That's what I think our future is, though. That's what I really do think our future is.
It's so limited. It's so ephemeral. You got it. I mean, we have to change things in a big way, and I think the only chance is both the inside and the outside game.
Maybe. I really just think that the next president is going to be an executive president, that all presidents until whatever the next mass change event in our country is will be an executive president. I think Elizabeth, look, she's the lawyers love her for a reason. Economists love her for a reason.
The way that you shake that up, though, is through a realignment. I mean, that's the only way that you break the gridlock. Totally. And Trump had that chance because he did force a realignment. Yeah. If he had come in, and this has been my thing from the beginning, if he had actually come in, open up the purse string, said we're doing infrastructure, there are going to be projects in every district, Democrats wouldn't have been able to resist that. And that would have been a place where he could have actually broken some of this gridlock because he scrambled the circuits. Instead, he went for the Muslim ban. It was deeply controversial. Everybody showed up at the airports, and that was it. That was the end of any hope of having bipartisan anything in this administration. Yeah. All right, we've got a great question from AJ with the blue hat there. We know what that's all about. It appears that most polling is done in a 1992 smart way, randomizing landline numbers. Do you see an issue with basing our polling on the opinions of those who use landlines and pick up calls from strangers? Saagar, what do you think? No, I think it's a good point. I mean, we've always worried about, can we poll online? Can we not poll cell phones? Ultimately, yeah. I mean, polls are not a perfect representative of the electorate, which is Donald Trump. He overperformed his polls by about 2 percentage points. Turns out that those 2 percentage points, turns out that they all were people who lived in rural communities and aren't traditionally polled. So polling if you base where you think everything stands just on polling models alone, forget it. Yeah. Well, and this is a point, that we've made on the show a couple times too, which is that it's very hard to come up with a good polling model when you have candidates who are trying to get inactive voters into the process, because no pollster is going to take their word that they're actually going to vote. If they don't have a track record of voting, they get screened down as a likely voter model and their voices aren't represented. That's part of what happened with Trump. Yep. I think it's also part of what happens with Bernie Sanders. Absolutely. I think it's part of Mr. Blue Hat. I think it's part of what happens with Andrew Yang, because he's speaking to a non-traditional constituency as well. I think that inherently makes things very harder to poll. And then when you have electoral methods like the caucuses in Iowa, where there's this, it's a very complicated process. People have to show up in person in most cases, all of that. It becomes even harder to know who actually is going to jump through the hoops to do that. And then if they don't meet that, if their candidate doesn't meet that 15% threshold, where then are they going to go? So that adds further complications. Yeah. A friend of the show, Jordan Sheridan, he has a theory that the polls that undersample young voters tend to be very poor for Bernie Sanders, and he believes that those aren't representative. I'd have to see more of the data on that, but those are things to pay attention to and be aware of. Yeah, so take it all with a grain of salt. When I look at polls, the best polls to look at are actually samplings of national trends, right? How do you feel about X? How do you feel about Y? How is the economy doing? What is the unemployment? These are the metrics which I put way more stock in. So that poll we talk about all the time, people want to burn the system down. I can look at that and be like, you know what? No, there's a lot of anti-establishment populist support is going to be there, and I'm willing to bet actually that it's undersampled in many of the traditional models, because people in the media don't understand that. So national dissatisfaction, how you feel about things are going, these are also questions you're able to answer a little bit more honestly, because doesn't have political ramifications. Yep. So indeed. All right, guys, that does it for Rising Q's this week. Check back later for an interview with the founders of a new PAC aiming to get progressive women into politics. They've got a working class focus. It's very interesting. And remember, you can send us your questions for Rising Q's whenever you want to. You don't have to wait for Wednesday. Send us a tweet or post on Instagram or YouTube using the hashtag Rising Q's. We'll see you back here tomorrow, guys. Have a great day. See you tomorrow.